So in my mind, the edit is really where intensity builds really come together. It's your, obviously your final moment to tell the story, and now you have the raw material to tell it in the way that you want to tell it. And that visual rhythm, like the pace of the cut itself is like the beat of the music. And when the beat in a song starts to go faster, it becomes a more intense song. And the same thing happens visually for a film. The more cuts you have, the more intense it is. So sometimes you can have all this coverage, but it's a pretty quiet scene. It's not really supposed to be that intense, and you're cutting around to all this different coverage, and you're inadvertently creating more intensity where you really don't need it. You just need to kind of let it play out and not have such a quick edit. But other times, that's either part of the style, like in the drama, or it's a tool that you can increase the intensity by ramping up the visual edit. Now, that doesn't mean you're like cutting like crazy, but you can tighten things up in the conversation. There are what's called J cuts and L cuts, where somebody's still talking, but we cut to the other person to see them react, and vice versa. We can watch somebody receiving information before they start speaking. So those things can help tighten. And I've seen the edit affect somebody's performance where it made it better when we tightened it up, or made it worse when we tightened it up. So the edit and the performance, those things, they really go hand in hand, and a frame can really change how much breathing room you're giving to that performance or to the scene or to the intensity of that moment. And so those are things, again, to think about when you're planning coverage and shooting it, but also when you are editing it. Shot size is very key. And again, when you're in post-production, if you're struggling with what's the intensity of the scene, try a different angle, try a closer shot, try to, and even if you've already used a close-up, maybe punch in a little just digitally, or do a very small digital push in, so that it kind of like creates that, that intense moment where we're getting even closer than we were before. Those are all different tricks to just kind of subtly build intensity in a visual way once you have your footage. The other thing too is tightening up the pace of the conversation, the pace of the edit, the visual rhythm. When you have multiple cuts, that is visually assaulting. So having a variety of cuts, cutting from a variety of things. Watch the storming of Normandy Beach in Saving Private Ryan, which is a visual assault, as it is intended to be. And part of that is the edit, part of that is also, the shutter speed, the camera, what's going on, the movement of the characters and the actors, and the camera and the actors, and the stuff that's flying through the scene. All of that stuff helps build intensity. And then with an intensity build, like I said, that narrative arc is just an average of intensity. So at some point it does need to break. And you see that in that Saving Private Ryan scene, where when they fall into the water, there's a little bit of like a breather where the assault kind of calms down. But then you're still not out of danger, right? So those are ways to think about it. Intercutting with a different scene. That's something that I believe happened in the movie Out of Sight, where there was this bar scene where Jennifer Lopez's character and George Clooney's character have kind of a role-playing, meet cute at the bar, where they take a time out and pretend that they're not on opposite sides of the law, and she's not supposed to arrest him and all this stuff. So that scene, it's a really wonderful scene, but then it starts intercutting and kind of flash forwarding with the next scene, which is them in the hotel room, and there's a love scene there. And my understanding is that in the script, those scenes were separate, but then in the edit, all the energy went out at that moment in the film. Like, if you kept them separate as intended in the script, and that, this timeout really just dragged the film down completely. And you need to kind of keep building. This needs to be going somewhere, even though it is somewhat of a step out of the plot. And so they started intercutting it and creating this visual rhythm with these freeze frames. And so it just kind of helped build, and the soundtrack is amazing. And so that scene really comes together and helps build in intensity because we're intercutting and kind of flash forwarding. The other thing to think about when intercutting is to intercut with something that is oppositional to what we just saw. So in Saving Private Ryan, there's all kinds of images that are kind of smash cut with each other, and it's like hopping around all over the location. It's here, it's there. So our eyes are just kind of all over the place, which is part of what makes it so intense. So this is where, Walter Murch's six ideal elements of the cut is what he calls the eye trace. It is where the audience is looking. And so if I'm looking in the frame here, and then it cuts to something where my eye has to look here in order to see what's going on, and then the next cut I have to look here, and then the next cut is here, and if those are all very quick cuts, your audience is like disoriented because they are physically moving their eyeballs and their head to kind of keep track of what's going on. In Mad Max, they specifically center framed all the action because of the quick cutting, so that they would not disorient their audience. And so you can follow this action scene in this quick cutting environment without wanting to throw up. Whereas that Saving Private Ryan scene, I saw it in the theater and I literally couldn't watch it because I was getting seasick, not because of the content but just because of the shake and the cutting and all this stuff. And even when I watch it on a computer, on a television, it still is so viscerally, visually jarring that I feel sick. And again, that's by design. That was intentional. On one hand, I'm kind of like, why make a movie that people can't watch? But that's for that scene especially, the rest of the movie is certainly not like that. But that oppositional cutting, whether it's kind of movement or imagery, in the out of sight example, you'll notice that when they cross cut between these two different scenes, the positioning of the actors has changed, and it almost feels like a 180-degree break, because they're in a different room and their body positioning has been flipped from what we're seeing now. So there's this kind of heightened intensity and disorientation because things now are moving. And it's not to the point where we're like, oh my God, what's happening? I don't know where we are in time and space. I mean, you still get it. It doesn't break you out of the story. It just adds this intensity to it, which I find really amazing and perfect. And the same is true for, intercutting different scenes that are going on, or even just a bit more of an abrupt cut. And the drama does this really well, where a lot of the shots, the edit just had this kind of abrupt feel, and it keeps you on your toes. And it's not so abrupt where it feels inappropriate or distracting from the story. It helps the story. It works with the story that it's telling, and it just kind of keeps it clipped and kind of on this edge. And there was this one moment where he kind of reaches for a coffee mug, and he throws it in the trash. And the first insert shot to cut to the coffee mug was long enough that you could tell he had reached for a coffee mug. But it was pretty tight in the sense that I didn't have enough time to read or really fully see what was on the coffee mug. So it wasn't too short because you saw essentially what you needed to see. He reached for a coffee mug. And at the time when I saw that edit, I was like, oof, like, why didn't they give us enough time to see what was on the coffee mug? Because he's clearly disturbed by it. And he, because he throws it away. But then they had another insert shot later on but then you see her come and open the trash can and see that he threw away the mug. And that's when we finally get a chance to read what was in the mug, and it lands. So that's such an important intensity build, and it's all about timing, and especially timing in the edit. The first time around when we see him throwing away a mug, we're not fully sure, like, well, what was so disturbing about that? And then it lands later, and it's like, oh my God, whereas if we had really gotten it the first time around, it would have, I think, maybe watered down the feeling of it when we see her react to it. So these are all different ways, and like really small ways to just kind of build in intensity. Sometimes I find that the performance that I liked on set, I don't end up using in the edit, because once those pieces start coming together, I ended up liking a different take for different reasons that I was not expecting, which is the magic of digital filmmaking, because you get to keep all of your takes, whereas when I started out in film, we could only edit from what we printed, and we usually only printed one take for each shot. So it's a wonder. I often will like steal things even from busted takes, just for like a reaction shot, or something that just happened where like we didn't even get through the whole scene, but there was a moment that there was a really interesting look that I could use in the edit. So there's a lot that you can find to build in that intensity. And then obviously sound helps you a whole lot. And but it all kind of has to work together. Story's got to be intense. You got to follow that through with strong performances, and then bring it together with your edit.